Hey guys, tonight we wander into a room, warmed by candlelight and quietly overgrown. The carpet's thick underfoot but softer still as the air, heavy with the scent of damp leaves and potpourri. Lace curtains hang still in the window. A glass dome rests on the corner table and inside it, a fern. Delicate, curled, almost breathing. The lady of the house has stepped out but not far. Her diary is open, the ink still fresh. You can almost hear her voice as she hums to herself, whispering to the fern like it's a guest. It's strange, isn't it, the idea of keeping a fern diary, whispering to plants, rearranging entire sitting rooms for better humidity. You probably wouldn't survive this era, honestly. Too much starch and too many social rules. But these women, they thrived on it. Or at least, found small rebellions in the leaves. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments what time it is where you're listening and where you are in the world tonight. Now, dim the lights maybe, turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a Victorian drawing room now, the kind with rosewood furniture, embroidered cushions, and a strong smell of beeswax polish. There's a fern in every corner. Maidenhairs, Boston ferns, even a stiff little bracken leaning out of a floral vase. And these aren't just decoration. These are companions, friends of a kind. You're stepping into Pteridomania, the Fern Craze. That word Pteridomania sounds like something you'd catch on a damp picnic. But it was real. Coined in 1855 by Charles Kingsley, who described it with a knowing smile and a jab of irony. He saw what was happening. Women, especially the well-read kind with time on their hands and an eye for fashion, were falling completely in love with ferns. Pressing them, sketching them, collecting spores like stamps, whispering to them like secret keepers. And not just women. Men too, but mostly the women made it their own. You watch a young lady open her fern diary. The cover is a deep forest green embossed with gold initials. A gift perhaps from a friend or admirer. Inside the pages are carefully arranged. Sketches in pencil, some shaded so delicately it's as if the leaf has settled onto the page and fallen asleep. Little poems always written in a sideways slant, sometimes in French. Pressed ferns rest like skeletons of butterflies. Dates, locations, careful Latin names. This is not a scrapbook. This is a ritual. She writes softly, the 6th of June. Found a perfect frond near the stream bend. Curled like a question mark. Whispered to it. Felt it whisper back. You smile. It's easy to be charmed by her, isn't it? And you notice something odd, the way she leans in toward the fern. As though it's listening. As though if she's quiet enough, she might hear something besides silence. Historians still debate whether the Victorian fern craze was merely aesthetic, or something deeper. Some say it was rebellion wrapped in moss. Others call it a retreat from the noise of industrial progress, a kind of soft refusal. A way to slow down time, in an era that was speeding up too fast. But one thing is clear. Ferns were everywhere. In the parlors. In embroidery. On jewelry. Even on gravestones. You walk past a carved stone cross there at its base. A curling fern, etched into the marble. A symbol of humility or maybe of eternal green. Back in the drawing room, a small boy pokes a frond with a silver fork. He gets a sharp no from the governess. Ferns are not for playing. They are sacred, whispered to, doted upon. You peer closer at the shelf and see something peculiar. A tiny dome of glass. Inside a single fern, planted in soil surrounded by dew, that refuses to dry. This is a Wardian case. Think of it as the Victorian version of a plant spa. Invented by a doctor named Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward, who, believe it or not, stumbled upon the concept while trying to raise a moth. Yes, a moth. But instead he ended up reinventing indoor gardening. You breathe in the moisture, real or imagined. The room feels like a greenhouse in miniature. The temperature is just a little warmer. The air, heavier perhaps. That hush of humidity wraps around you like a shawl. And the ladies, they sit in soft chairs, gloved hands folded politely. One leans over and whispers to the fern. You almost ask, but don't. You know she's not expecting an answer. Not out loud. You move toward the window, looking out onto the garden. More ferns, climbing the brick wall tucked into cracks. Even one in an old boot, left there accidentally a touch of whimsy. Someone's little rebellion. A cat slinks past and knocks over a pot. Soil spills out, exposing delicate roots. A tiny scream from the room. The maid rushes to fix it. You watch as she picks it up carefully, almost apologetically. The fern will be fine, probably. Somewhere behind you, a music box begins to play. The melody is slow, circular, like something you've known forever, though you can't place it. And there, resting atop the piano, not a bust of Beethoven, but a fern. Its fronds sway slightly, as though nodding in approval. You look around once more. This is not just a phase, not a trend. This is a mood, a quiet reverence, a green hush in an age of coal smoke and clanging gears. And as the music slows, the diary closes, just for tonight. But don't worry, she'll open it again tomorrow. You return the next day, not that the room has changed. Time moves slowly here. Dust settles gently on the velvet armchair and the ferns. They seem even greener, as if they've grown just a little. Just for you. There's a new entry in the diary. The 7th of June. Rearranged the sofa again for the frond's sake. Light was too harsh. At 3 o'clock. You look toward the parlor window, where sunlight pools in a golden puddle on the carpet. It shifts slightly, with the breeze filtered through layers of curtain lace and glass. And there, just in the beam's reach, is the lady's favorite fern, a delicate maidenhair. Its fronds tremble faintly, not from touch, but from the sound of a distant piano being tuned upstairs. She'd moved the entire settee yesterday, and the pianoforte, and even the large dog statue by the hearth, all to please a plant. This is the sort of thing that would make most husbands sigh. But in her diary, it's noted like a small victory. Found perfect lighting at last. Afternoon sun. Room warms like a conservatory. Frond unfurled at tea time. Victorian homes were oddly serious about their light, especially when it came to their ferns. A frond left in poor lighting could brown, curl, die. And to these women, that was not just plant care, it was emotional care. You can see her now seated near the window with her sewing. She glances over at the plant every few minutes, sometimes sighing, sometimes smiling. The fern does not answer, but its very presence says enough. Historians still debate whether the obsession with lighting was more about botany or identity. Was the fern a symbol of feminine agency in a heavily structured domestic world? Or was it simply a passive companion, an excuse to move the furniture, control a little corner of chaos, and escape the expectations of society? One pot at a berry-sprestins. Time. You walk over to the fireplace where another fern sits in a ceramic pot, this one shaped like a lion's head. A gift from a sister, perhaps. Its soil is a little dry. The maid must have forgotten to water it this morning. You bend slightly and notice a folded note tucked beneath the pot. Curious, you pull it out. Reminder: ask Mr. Godfrey if ferns enjoy music. Possible experiment: play nocturnes near frond, observe reaction. It's signed simply E.L. You smile. Of course she would wonder. Of course she would believe, just a little, that ferns could feel things. In fact, by the mid-1800s, popular magazines often flirted with the idea that plants could sense emotion. Some even claimed ferns were sensitive to tone, that if you played a certain piece of Chopin, a frond might slowly uncurl. It was anecdotal, of course, but no less romantic for that. Even more curious, a few Victorian ladies believed ferns could wilt from boredom. So in rooms left too long without visitors, they would whisper stories to the plants. Tiny fables shared in secret. They'd say things like, "This morning I dreamed I was a boat. You'll never guess what the postman wore today. Do you think she really loves him? I'm not sure either." And the fern would listen, or at least it wouldn't interrupt. In a world where women were often discouraged from expressing complex opinions in public, this quiet exchange with greenery may have been more than it seemed. A form of reflection, of unburdening, a diary with chlorophyll. You lean closer to the maidenhair. Its fronds are so fine, like little green eyelashes. You whisper something. It's okay, no one's watching. "Hello there. It's me again. I brought tea," the lady notices. She smiles faintly from across the room, then returns to her sketching. A new entry. This time not words, but a drawing of you. Or at least, someone who looks very much like you, bent toward the fern. Listening, you wander through the room again where each plant has its place not just in the room but in the lady's emotional landscape. Some are named, some are anonymous but dearly loved. There's Miss Weatherly, a tall Boston fern that flops a little dramatically every Thursday. Sir Trillium, a small and surly button fern who sits on the windowsill and refuses to grow. And one called simply Mother's Ghost, which she refuses to explain. You glance again at the diary. The ink has smeared slightly too much emotion in the penstroke, perhaps. Mother's Ghost did not respond today. I fear she's fading. Whispered to her anyway. The house creaks slightly. You can hear the ticking of the mantel clock, gentle rhythmic grounding. The lady rises, crosses the room, and places one hand delicately on the back of a chair. She looks to the fern, pauses, and whispers something under her breath. You don't catch it, but the plant might have. And then she smiles. It's small, but it's enough. A soft victory in a room full of quiet triumphs. The candlelight flickers. The dog statue seems to nod. The diary remains open, waiting for more. You'll stay a little longer, won't you? You return to the drawing room just after a morning rain. The scent of damp stone and wet earth hangs in the air, blending softly with lavender polish and old paper. Outside puddles reflect broken bits of sky. Inside, the fern glistens. Dew has settled on its fronds like pearls on velvet. Today, the lady writes slowly. The 8th of June. New frond unfurling. Spiraled tight. Like a question, or an answer waiting. You settle in beside her as she dips her pen again. The ink she uses today is brown, walnut-dyed, rich and earthy. The pen tip scratches faintly like the shuffle of a slipper on wood. Shall we go for a walk? She murmurs. But she's not speaking to you. She's speaking to the fern. And so the hunt begins. Not a proper hunt, no guns, no horns, no grand declarations. This is a fern hunt, a favorite pastime of Victorian gentlewomen, especially those who felt the need to escape parlors and chaperones. You imagine the scene: damp glades, bird call, and the canopy laughter muffled by corsets. You walk with her along a muddy path. The hem of her dress darkens with each step, collecting secrets from the forest floor. Boots squish politely. A small spade rests in her hand. In the other, a satchel of wax paper and ribbon. Ferns grow everywhere here, under hedgerows, along stone walls, between the roots of ancient oaks. Some are bold and tall. Others hide in the shadows like shy children. She kneels down, brushing moss from a rock. A tiny frond peeks out. She gasps. This is it, the rare kind she read about in last week's Lady's Botanical Companion. Curled tightly like a bishop's crook, she retrieves a small tin from her bag, unscrews the lid, and tucks the frond inside with gentle reverence. You wonder if she'll name this one too. Historians still debate whether these outdoor fern hunts were encouraged as science or tolerated as a genteel rebellion. Some say it was simply a wholesome hobby for upper-class women. Others suggest it was a coded form of independence, a way to step outside without stepping too far. You see them now, groups of ladies walking single file along country paths, hats pinned firmly, laughter catching like birdsong in the hedgerows. One clutches a copy of Loudon's Encyclopedia of Plants, another balances a case of sketches. They compare finds. Did you see the scales on that stipe? One says. Oh yes, darling, like lace. Another pulls out a tiny pressed fern wrapped in silk. From Devon, she whispers. Stolen from a chapel wall. You smile. These women are scientists, artists, poets, and mild criminals in the gentlest way. They keep journals, of course. Some detailed like ledgers, others dreamy and romantic. You peek into one. Under the holly arch, found one with spiraled curls. Reminded me of Mr. L's handwriting. Carried it home in my glove. There's something beautiful about it, the way they fuse observation with memory, botany with longing. It's not just a plant. It's a moment. A mood. A secret, pressed flat. You return with her to the house, wet shoes removed at the door. She lays the finds out on a linen cloth, each fern with space to breathe. A small brush removes soil, a dropper wets the root. It's quiet work, precise, tender. There's a whisper of movement behind you, the maid bringing a pot of tea, its porcelain painted with tiny ferns. Even the china's in on it. She begins the pressing. Lays a frond between blotting papers. Adds a weight. She mutters softly. Stay flat, little one. Don't curl away. You notice the strange gentleness of her touch, like folding a letter you'll never send. Each leaf positioned carefully, never forced. The tools she uses aren't from a lab, they're from a sewing kit. A writing desk. This is woman's work, but not in the way anyone expected. One of her pressed ferns already rests on the mantel, framed. It hangs beside a faded photo, a young woman with sharp eyes and a soft mouth. Possibly her sister. Possibly someone else entirely. You ask, but she doesn't answer. Instead, she whispers to the fern again. Something short. Just a breath. You can't catch the words, but the feeling lingers. And for a moment, the room feels like it's listening too. It's late afternoon now, and the light has softened into that golden hush before evening. The drawing room glows gently, not brightly, but with the warmth of polished wood and stories waiting to be told. You step toward the corner table where a curious object sits under glass, a small Wardian case fogged ever so slightly with its own tiny weather. Inside it, a miniature world. Moss bark and 3 tidy ferns, their fronds unfurling like dancers mid-curtsy. You open the lid. Just a little. The air inside is thick, warm, fragrant, like walking into a forest that has been paused in time. This is her pride and joy. Wardian cases were the invention of a London Dr. Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward, who hadn't set out to change indoor botany at all. He merely wanted to protect a moth cocoon. Instead, he stumbled upon a self-contained ecosystem that kept plants alive for months, even during long voyages at sea. Who would have guessed that a frustrated moth collector would unlock the secret to ferns in drawing rooms? You peer closer. A tiny label is pinned in the soil with delicate handwriting. Rescued after storm. Wilted for 2 days, then rallied. The date is 2 years ago. The plant still thrives. These little greenhouses swept through upper-class homes like whispers on a breeze. They were elegant, low maintenance, and somehow deeply emotional. To own a Wardian case was to say, I care. I tend. I observe. Even when the world outside becomes noisy and unpredictable, here under glass life is quietly perfect. You watch the lady polish the corners of the dome with a square of silk. Her movements are unhurried, reverent even. The silence between her breaths feels intentional, like punctuation in a poem. She's dressed simply today. Just a soft brown skirt, a cream blouse, sleeves rolled back at the wrist. No jewelry. A day for tending, not showing. She reaches inside the case and trims a browned leaf. The scissors make the tiniest snip, a sound almost too polite to exist. Then she does something unexpected. She leans in, very close, and whispers something. You lean in too, of course. You can't help it, but the words are too soft, swallowed by the glass, tucked into the soil like a secret offering. It's not just one case. There are others in the house, in the hallway, the kitchen nook, even one on a bedside table. Each holds a slightly different world. One is filled with miniature ivy, another with moss and a single violet. A third, strangely, contains only stones and lichen, no greenery at all. A dry landscape like a memory of a fern. Historians still debate the symbolic weight of these Wardian cases in women's lives. Some say they were status symbols, yes, but also tiny utopias. Spaces of control in homes that were otherwise dictated by male presence, rigid schedules, and endless social rules. In a Wardian case, nothing argued. Nothing misbehaved. It simply grew. You run your finger along the brass frame. It's warm to the touch. You imagine what it must have felt like to live in a world where you couldn't vote, couldn't own property outright in many cases, couldn't study medicine or law, and yet you could build a living, breathing world in glass. You could name it, feed it, whisper to it, and no one could take that away. On the desk beside the case, her diary sits open again. The ink is green today, a mossy, quiet color. Terrarium adjusted. Lowered southern frond. Added slice of apple for humidity. You blink. Apple. Yes, some ladies believed that placing a wedge of apple inside the case could enhance the humidity and revive sluggish plants. A home remedy passed through word of mouth, printed in the fern. Lover's companion alongside practical tips and poetic nonsense. You open the case again just slightly, and smell it now, the faintest hint of fruit beneath the damp green. Outside the window, the world moves on horses. Clop past, someone sells muffins in the lane. A child shouts and is swiftly shushed. But in here, time is syrupy, slow. Kind, you move to the chaise and lie back. Just for a moment. Your eyes land on the ceiling, where ferns have been painted into the molding. Spirals, leaves, a soft invasion. Even architecture is not immune. The lady walks past you, humming under her breath. You don't recognize the tune, but it's low and sweet. Something that makes the fern inside the case seem to sway just slightly. She adjusts the glass lid again, taps the corner like sealing in a wish, and then, without words, she invites you to hold the diary. You do. Carefully. Your fingers barely press the leather. It's warm. The page reads, "Spoke to her again. She's shy today, but listening." And you believe it. The evening air is cooler now, filtered through silk curtains carrying the faintest trace of lilac and chimney soot. Lamps glow softly in the hallway. The drawing room settles, with a creak here, a sigh there. And in the quiet, you hear it again. A whisper. Not yours this time. Hers. She's leaning toward a fern in the corner, not the prized Wardian case, but a tall, unglamorous fellow perched awkwardly in a chipped porcelain basin. Its fronds are a bit uneven, one even drooping, like it's had a very long day. She calls it Walter. No explanation, just Walter. She's whispering to him now, slowly, rhythmically. Not unlike the way you might speak to a sleepy child, or a secret kept far too long. You listen in. Still too dry. I know. We'll try again tomorrow. Pause. You did your best. You always do. It's not just habit. It's comfort. Mutual. A soft exchange with no expectation of response. And yet, you'd swear Walter perked up a little. Victorian women whispering to their plants wasn't considered odd, at least not within the right parlor. It was intimate, yes. Quietly dramatic. But not scandalous. It was a kind of caregiving, with no need to appear useful. You settle into the chair beside her. There's a fresh fire burning low. On the mantel above it, another small plant placed precariously beside a faded photograph of a young man in uniform. Perhaps a brother, a cousin, someone gone. The fern leans toward the photo ever so slightly. She notices your glance but says nothing. Instead, she opens her diary and begins to write. You watch her script unfold, looping even. It has its own rhythm. Walter drooped again. I suspect he dislikes Tuesdays. Whispered softly. Promised he's not alone. You glance around the room, suddenly aware of how many ferns reside here. It's not just decoration. It's a network. A quiet green community. Some stand proud and tall. Others curl in on themselves like shy guests at a party. And each one seems to have a story, a mood. Historians still debate whether Victorians truly believed in plant sentience, or whether it was just poetic indulgence. The truth may lie somewhere between science and sentiment. One popular theory spread through magazines and parlors alike suggested that plants, ferns especially, responded to tone, that they thrived under affection and dimmed under harsh voices. You reach toward Walter gently, very gently, and offer him a simple hello. She smiles. Approves. He's partial to compliments, she says. You look again at the diary. On the back page is a list. A peculiar one. Names whispered. Responses noted. Lady Sybil Frond turned toward east window after compliment. Nora failed to uncurl despite flattery. Walter perked up after lullaby. Unnamed, no movement. But room felt softer. It's part joke. But not entirely. There's affection in this, but also a method. Observations. Results. In her own way, she's doing science, the kind not printed in journals, but etched into daily ritual. You leaf through another section of her diary. There's an entry marked only with a leaf drawing. Heard a rustle today. Unprovoked. Perhaps coincidence. Perhaps not. There's no need to confirm or deny. In this room, the plants are listening. Whether they answer is beside the point. You watch her cross to the other side of the room where a group of smaller ferns cluster in mismatched teacups. One cup still bears the lipstick trace of an earlier guest. She lifts the frond, gently brushes away a fallen petal, and whispers, "You're safe now. It's just us." You close your eyes. The whispering isn't for the plant, not really. It's for herself. For her mother, perhaps. For a version of the world that asks nothing but presence, you begin to hear the room differently, not as stillness, but as dialogue. The pop of the fire, the shift of a leaf, the slow exhale of a draft, and her voice gentle, steady, threading through it all like a lullaby. She returns to her chair, pours 2 cups of tea. One for her, one for you. You sip quietly. It tastes like chamomile and something green. Would you like to whisper to one, she asks. You nod. She chooses a small fern with fronds like eyelashes, places it in front of you, leans back. You hesitate, and then you speak. A simple phrase. Nothing grand. Thank you for growing. The frond does not move, but the room feels warmer, softer, like it exhaled. You glance at the diary. She's writing again. New voice in the room today, Fern responded in stillness. I think that counts. And you agree. You wake to the gentle sound of rain against the parlor windows. Not a storm, just a quiet drizzle. The kind that makes everything feel like it's been dipped in honey and hushed. She's already up, of course. You find her by the writing desk, bent low over her diary, the soft scratching of her pen blending seamlessly with the patter outside. Beside her sits a small porcelain bowl filled with tiny fronds, arranged like a bouquet made entirely of whispers. Today is sorting day. You take your place beside her and glance over the collection. These aren't just decorative, they're specimens. Each one plucked from a different corner of the garden or perhaps a borrowed hedgerow near the church. No two are the same. One curls like a violin scroll, another fans out like a peacock's tail. Her hands move with a practiced rhythm, inspecting, brushing off soil, arranging. This one came from behind the bakery, she says softly. It smelled like bread. For hours. You smile. She lifts a frond and turns it in the light. A small label dangles from a thread, Dryopteris affinis maybe. Historians still debate these taxonomies after all. You chuckle. The idea of historians debating fern species seems both grand and absurd. And yet they did. Victorian botanists, both amateur and professional, argued endlessly over classifications, naming conventions, and the proper way to describe the personality of a frond. The language was poetic and scientific all at once. It had to be. Ferns were stubborn that way. She gently sets the labeled frond aside and opens a new page in her diary. Possibly a phoenix, though curl suggests otherwise. Might be a rebellious cousin. Her humor is soft, dry. It seeps into the room like the scent of mint tea. You help her sort the rest. She gives you a magnifying glass, a pretty one with brass trim and a ribbon handle. You lean close and examine the tiny ridges along a stem. They're like fingerprints, ancient and precise. She leans over your shoulder and whispers, "You're doing quite well for someone with no training." You grin. "I've had a good teacher." At the end of the table lies a smaller pile, a few imperfect fronds. Torn, dried, some speckled with tiny brown dots. You reach for one, but she stops you. Those, she says quietly, are the sacred misfits. You raise an eyebrow. They didn't press properly. Some curled too soon. One broke in the wind. She pauses. But they deserved a place. So they're documented here. She opens a slim book bound in linen, no title on the cover. Inside are the misfits, each glued to a page, each with a small description. Found near schoolyard. Trampled, but resilient. Too dry to save. Still beautiful. Wind snapped. Still curved like it meant to. You realize something. This isn't a science journal. It's a quiet kind of empathy. A eulogy for the overlooked. You help her paste one in a tiny shriveled thing that looks like it gave up halfway through growing. She writes beside it, "Did its best." That's enough. You sit in silence for a moment. The rain thickens. The room smells of ink and soil and lemon polish. She breaks the stillness. "Would you like to give one a name?" You nod. You choose a small vivid green frond with 3 perfect curls. You think for a moment. "Francis." She smiles. "Francis it is." She writes it in her best script. "Francis found during drizzle." Spiraled as if dreaming. Historians may never find these entries. They may never understand how many women like her, like you, built entire worlds out of leaf and ink and care. But the ferns remember. Or at least, they remain. She leans back in her chair, brush in hand, and hums something slow and sad and sweet. You recognize the tune now. It's from a lullaby. One not sung but hummed in the corner of a nursery where the rocking chair never stopped. She whispers to a final frond. You did well today. Thank you. Then she sets down her brush, stretches her arms, and says to no one in particular, enough for now. But the room still listens. The next day arrives gently, ushered in by soft light and the scent of something faintly herbal, lavender, rosemary, no, mint crushed beneath a boot near the garden steps. You follow her out into the conservatory. It's warmer here, a little wilder. The glass ceiling drips with condensation, and somewhere above a bird taps politely at the pane. The air hums thick with plant breath and the soft clink of watering cans. This isn't the tidy lace-curtained drawing room anymore. This is the heartwood of her home, green and damp and whisper quiet. She walks barefoot today. Yes, barefoot. Her skirts are pinned up, her sleeves rolled. A smear of dirt streaks one cheek and she smiles like someone who's been whispering to the ivy again. You almost don't recognize her, and yet, she seems more herself here than anywhere else. She gestures for you to follow past hanging ferns, trailing vines and shelves, filled with clay pots, labeled in the familiar looping script. Mr. Thistle, Rosa, F., Anna, from Aunt H. Each name a memory in root and leaf. At the back of the room stands a large wooden cabinet. You watch her unlock it with a small brass key. The door creaks open, revealing the collection. Rows and rows of diaries, velvet bound, linen wrapped, some tied with ribbon, others left to fray, all filled with pressed ferns, sketches, notations, secrets. She pulls one from the shelf-aged blue cover spine held together with care and luck. Inside, the entries shift in tone. They aren't just notes anymore. They're codes. You run your fingers across the page and find something peculiar. A triangle beside a sketch, a dot next to a date, a spiral drawn in the margin. She leans over and says simply, the language of leaves. You blink. What do you mean? She turns a page. Another spiral. A feather drawn upside down. A small line of pressed moss. They meant something once. At least to her. To whom? She pauses. My great-aunt Eleanor. She kept this diary during her time in Wales. Believed that ferns could speak. You tilt your head. She said they gave signs. Curls for yes, spots for worry. An unusually fast uncurling for delight. A soft laugh. Historians still debate whether she was a botanist. Or gently mad. You smile. Of course they do. And you understand something suddenly. This woman, your hostess, this whisperer of fronds, didn't invent this ritual. She inherited it, built upon it, polished it into something half science, half prayer. The cabinet holds more than just plants. It holds lineage. You turn another page. A date, an unfamiliar name, a faint thumbprint in dirt. Whoever Eleanor was, she left pieces of herself here, pressed flat, carefully indexed, curled in the language of those who refuse to forget. Your hostess pulls another book down. This one newer. Hers. The cover still smells like ink and rosemary oil. She flips to the latest page. Tried Eleanor's spiral sign beside the Dryopterus today. No immediate shift. We'll try again at dusk. You grin. Still testing theories. She shrugs playfully. It's tradition. You move deeper into the conservatory where the plants grow bolder. A large fern arches overhead like a green chandelier. Below it, a small bench invites rest. You sit. Around you, the language hums not spoken but present. A frond leans forward. A vine coils deliberately around a beam. A pot sits cracked, but the roots inside seem unbothered. You reach into your pocket and find a small pressed leaf she gave you yesterday. It's flat now, fragile, but still very much itself. You tuck it into a book beside you. No note, no explanation, just a curl and a spiral, and maybe one day a whisper. The sun is lower today, casting long shadows across the conservatory floor. Golden bands that slip between hanging leaves and sway just slightly with the breeze. She's dressed in soft gray, a shawl draped lightly across her shoulders, as if the day called for gentleness. You walk with her through the house past shelves of dusty books, a ticking clock that's always 3 minutes behind, and a vase filled with last week's violets now crinkled like old letters. She pauses at the sideboard, picks up a silver tray, and smiles. Shall we go to the garden party? But not just any garden party. This one, you discover, is not outdoors. You follow her to the largest room in the house, the solarium, where high windows hold the sky like a painting and the walls are dressed in climbing greenery. There's a grand mirror at one end and a piano at the other, and suspended from the ceiling, ferns, dozens, hanging in woven baskets trimmed with lace dripping with pearls of condensation. You've arrived at what some once called a fern ball. Yes, really. In the height of Pteridomania, some Victorian hostesses threw entire social events in honor of their ferns. Guests would sip cordial beneath fronded ceilings, admire fern arrangements shaped like hearts or crowns, and if lucky, go home with a pressed souvenir wrapped in tissue and sealed with wax. She gestures for you to sit. A servant brings chilled lemonade in crystal glasses, each one etched with a tiny spiral pattern. Of course, soft music plays from a nearby quartet cello harp flute and the occasional sleepy violin. The notes float up and around the ferns as if urging them to sway in rhythm. You lean back in your chair, watching as other guests enter. All are dressed in muted greens and earth tones. No one speaks loudly. No one claps. It's the quietest party you've ever attended, and yet you can feel the delight. She leans over and whispers. They're not just here for each other. You follow her gaze to the center, display a massive Boston fern layered in cascading tiers, resting atop a pedestal like a queen in her throne. Around it, ladies and gentlemen take slow turns, admiring, not too close, of course, just enough to feel noticed. You hear murmurs. The symmetry is divine. I believe it's 5 years old, can you imagine? She waters with peppermint. That's the secret. Historians still debate whether these fern balls were sincere acts of admiration or subtle contests in disguise. Likely both. But what is certain is that among this quiet crowd, the fern was the star. No waltz, no debate, no dramatic entrances. Just soft gazes and nods, the occasional sigh, and the rustle of skirts on tiled floor. Your hostess rises and walks slowly toward the centerpiece. She bows just slightly and offers a small gift, a paper packet tied with ribbon. Inside, spores. From her own Wardian case, a gesture of respect. You watch as another woman approaches and does the same. A small frond pressed in waxed paper. The exchange is wordless, but meaningful. A kind of botanic diplomacy. Then music shifts, not louder, just sweeter, and a pair begins to dance slowly, quietly, almost without touching. Around them, others follow, and the room fills with movement that seems designed more for the ferns than the humans. You glance upward. Some of the hanging fronds are swaying now, whether from the music or the moment. Your hostess returns to your side and murmurs, "This is the only kind of party I like." You nod. You understand. Here the air is kind. The expectations soft. The center of attention is green, quiet, and asks for nothing but patience. You sip the last of your lemonade and taste something floral at the end. Lemon verbena, maybe, or a memory of something else. As the music fades, the guests slowly disappear like shadows slipping behind curtains. One leaves a small pressed leaf on the table. Another tucks a note beneath a vase. You linger, and she lets you. The last frond above you curls inward as if satisfied. The next morning arrives wrapped in fog, not the kind that swallows buildings whole, but the soft, ghostly kind that hangs low over the lawn, curling around the tops of hedges and lingering in the garden like it too is reluctant to leave. You find her in the breakfast room, a sunlit space, despite the mist, sipping something from a delicate blue china cup. Her other hand cradles a letter. "From Claire," she says with a smile. "She sent me spores." You sit down across from her, and she lays the envelope between you. Inside is a folded note and a single careful packet of dried spores, cinnamon-colored dust barely visible to the eye. You lift it gently and feel the texture fine, almost unreal. She found them near an abbey wall, she says. Said they looked like freckles on old stone. The two of you exchange a look, half amusement, half reverence, because you know, spores are no small gesture. In Victorian times, women didn't just share gossip or recipes. Among the botanical-minded, they exchanged spores the way others might exchange secrets. Tucked into letters wrapped in waxed paper labeled with ornate cursive, they were tokens of friendship and sometimes gentle rivalry. Your hostess opens a drawer from the sideboard and removes a wooden box. Inside her personal spore archive, rows of tiny envelopes labeled and dated, some adorned with sketches or wax seals. She fans them out like tarot cards. There's one from Brighton, another from a coastal walk in Wales, a few from Clare, several marked simply, "From H." She pauses on one faded paper ink nearly gone. "From J, lost in wind, remembered in soil." You don't ask. She turns the envelope over, fingers lingering, then sets it aside with a soft breath. This is the nature of their correspondence, quiet, coded, tender. A shared language that leaves no trace on public record, and yet speaks volumes. Historians still debate whether these women saw themselves as scientists, artists, or simply hobbyists. Many had no formal training. Some were never published, but their letters reveal a deep engagement with taxonomy, ecology, and more importantly, with each other. She reads you part of Claire's note. "The spores are temperamental, but I trust you'll whisper them into life. Try the west window, the light there is forgiving." You both smile. She rises and moves to her potting table, a simple wooden surface near the conservatory doors, littered with bits of moss soil, broken pots, and tools with smoothed handles from years of use. She pours a bit of damp peat into a shallow tray, adds moss, mists it twice. You stand close beside her as she takes a silver spoon, not for eating but for sowing, and scoops just the tiniest bit of the spore dust. She sprinkles it over the surface like seasoning on a memory. "Now we wait," she whispers. And indeed, fern spores are patient creatures. They take their time, weeks, months sometimes. A long game of softness and stillness. She writes a note in her diary. Claire's spores sown. They know what to do. Then adds below it, shared tea, fog. The world felt light. You glance over her shoulder. She's added your name. Just your first. A small thing. And yet, in this house, such gestures matter. The fog outside begins to lift. You watch as sunlight breaks through the glass, striking the new tray just so. The soil glistens. The moss leans slightly toward the warmth. She notices. They're listening already. And for a moment it's easy to believe. Because what is this if not magic? The quiet kind. The real kind. Dust becomes green. Solitude becomes company. A whisper becomes life. You walk past the hanging pots once more, and one of the ferns, you're sure of it, seems to nod as you pass. Perhaps it's just the breeze, or perhaps it's a greeting. Late afternoon settles into the house like a cat curling up beside the fire, unhurried, warm, and vaguely drowsy. You find yourself again in the drawing room, where the light is beginning to slope downward through the tall windows, painting the wooden floor in soft golden shadow. Today she's polishing the fronds. Yes, polishing. With a square of muslin and a bowl of tepid water infused with a single drop of rose oil, she gently wipes each leaf of her oldest fern, the one that lives in the corner by the clock. So large now it brushes the ceiling with one ambitious stalk. I call this one Queen Catherine, she says, half to you, half to the plant. She demands attention, but earns it. You reach out to touch one frond and she nods approval, though you know to be careful. Queen Catherine has standards. You watch her hands firm but kind, each movement with intention. This is not just plant care. It's something between a ritual and an apology. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that time has passed and the dust has come, and the least one can do is greet it with tenderness. She hums under her breath a tune you recognize now from the garden party. It seems to belong to the ferns as much as to her, and then she tells you a story. Once in her younger days, she says she visited a manor house in the north, one famed for its fern collection. It had a fern room, a full conservatory dedicated entirely to fronds. No flowers, no vines, just the rustle of green upon green. It was here she saw her first fern chandelier. You blink. A what? Yes, a fern chandelier. Hung from iron hooks, fronds trailing downward like soft feathers, with candles tucked between leaves and little glass cups. Entire dinners were held beneath these living, dripping canopies. It smelled like spring, she says. And wax. And mystery. You lean forward. She continues. The hostess of that dinner believed ferns could ward off unpleasant conversation. That beneath a fern chandelier gossip, softened arguments unraveled, and secrets stayed secrets. No one ever raised their voice under the fronds. You wonder if that's true. Historians still debate whether these chandelier gatherings were social events or symbolic rituals, but in certain circles they became fashionable. Photos still exist grainy and sepia-toned of dinner tables nestled beneath living ceilings. She finishes cleaning. Queen Catherine dabs the bowl with a towel and places it on a nearby shelf. The fern seems to gleam slightly in the light, not from moisture but from attention. You move to the writing desk and open one of her lesser-used journals, this one with a brown leather spine and a faint fern pressed into the cover. Inside is a list, titled simply, Politenesses for Plants. It reads, greet them by name. Don't water while angry. Always ask permission before trimming. Leave music playing when you leave the room. Apologize if you forget to mist. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. It's just manners. You turn the page. More rules, half serious, half poetry. Whisper secrets into the soil. They root better that way. Compliments should be given with 2 fingers on the pot. If a fern droops, ask if it needs space. You can't help but smile. Whether these customs have scientific merit is beside the point. They create relationship. And in a time when many women were told to be quiet, to be still, to grow within limits, perhaps the ferns listen differently. She brings out a tray, small cakes cut into triangles flecked with lemon zest and sugared thyme. You sit on the rug, tea beside you, and nibble slowly. Overhead, Queen Catherine leans just a bit to the left. You think she's eavesdropping. Outside, the wind picks up. Inside, the ferns rustle not wildly but thoughtfully, like an agreement, and for a moment it feels like the room has always been listening. You rise early the next morning, earlier than her for once, and find the drawing room bathed in a strange, soft stillness, the kind that feels like the house is holding its breath. The ferns are quiet too, but they notice you. You wander through the space like a familiar guest, fingers tracing the edges of tables and the velvet of armchairs. It feels different when she's not here. The energy is gentler, yet slightly unsettled, like a diary left open on the wrong page. On the far table rests her correspondence box, unlocked today. You hesitate then. Gently lift the lid. Inside, a tidy stack of letters wrapped in ribbon. You recognize some of the handwriting: Claire's Aunt H, as and, a few signed only with initials or a leaf pressed to the page. You pick one at random. Dearest Elle, I've tried to recreate the frond you sketched in April, but I fear mine is too proud. Yours had humility. Another found a damp patch in my stone wall, and with it a perfect treasure. She's pale shy, possibly female. I've named her Edith. You smile, and then you notice something else, a letter not yet opened. You turn it over. No return address. Just her name, written in a hand you don't recognize. The seal is broken already. You unfold it slowly, carefully, as if the ink might still be drying. Inside, I dreamt I was a fern. Not growing, not exactly, but unfolding. Quietly. Thought you'd understand. It's unsigned. You hear footsteps behind you. She's awake. I see you've met my ghostwriter, she says with a small grin, brushing her hair back with one hand. No idea who sends them, but they're always right. She doesn't seem bothered. If anything, she seems comforted. You'd be surprised how many women write in secret, she says, pouring herself a cup of tea. Especially about ferns. No one listens quite like they do. You sit beside her. She flips open her current diary, one you haven't seen yet. The cover is pale green, embroidered with threads in the shape of spiraled fronds. Inside, the pages are neater than usual, almost clinical. Dates, sketches, temperature readings. You arch a brow. An experiment, she says. Trying to track whether music or silence helps the new spores better. She points to 2 trays. One sits beside the phonograph, the other near the curtained door. They're sisters, you see. But I want to know which one grows stronger. You glance at the tray nearest the music. A small frond has just begun to peek through the soil, soft, pale, almost translucent. They always lean toward the sound, she adds, like they remember it from the womb. You turn the page in her diary and find a chart, dates, observations, moon phases. She taps the margin with her finger. Still not sure about that part. But the ferns seem moodier during the full moon. Historians still debate the role of lunar gardening in Victorian plant care. Some wrote long treatises on the benefits of sowing by moonlight. Others dismissed it entirely as superstition. But in this house, the full moon still earns a whisper or two, just in case. You help her carry the trays into better light. She moves with ease but carefully, as if each step matters. And then she asks you a question. Do you want to name one? You hesitate. It's a responsibility after all. She holds up the spore tray near the music, the one that's just begun to stir. You lean in. Look at the tiny green tip curled like the beginning of a secret. And then you say quietly, "Faye?" She smiles. Faye it is. She writes it in the diary, adding a tiny heart beside it, the only mark that breaks the otherwise orderly page. Then she adds, "Named by a guest." Music in her roots. Moon to be determined. You sit back, and the room sits with you, not in silence. Not entirely. There's the soft crackle of the fire, the chirp of a bird on the sill, and the steady, gentle breath of ferns, rustling not from wind, but from attention. They remember everything. They've always been listening. The sky today is the pale kind of blue that makes everything seem a little farther away. Clouds drift like thoughts that never quite settle. And the garden outside is still expectant, maybe. Inside the parlor, she's playing the piano. Not a sonata, not something grand. Just soft notes plucked like petals drifting through the air like the dust motes you now notice for the first time. You settle on the chaise near the window, and beside you, as always, is a fern. A small one today in a ceramic pot painted with faded daisies. Its fronds stretch toward the music. Or at least it feels that way. She finishes the melody and lets the silence settle like a second breath. That one, she says, nodding toward the piano, is for the asplenium. It prefers the minor key. You smile. You're not sure she's joking. You're not sure she ever is when it comes to the ferns. And then she tells you something strange. There's a theory. She begins lifting her teacup that plants remember sound. Not like memory the way we know it, but resonance. Familiar vibration. That's why I play the same songs to them each morning. You glance at the asplenium. It looks rather composed, actually. She leans in. I once played something loud in overture, I think. They drooped for days. You believe her. Historians still debate whether the Victorians were projecting emotion onto their plants, or if they were simply sensitive to the mood they created. But either way, a pattern formed quieter music meant greener ferns. One particularly eccentric lady in Bath reportedly hired a string quartet to play nothing but lullabies for her prized polystichum. Your hostess seems to approve. She rises from the piano and walks to the bookshelf, retrieving a slim volume. Collected notations for mood-sensitive flora, she reads aloud, tapping the spine. Published in 1874. Utter nonsense, but charming. She flips it open and points to a page. To soothe a distressed fern, Mendelssohn or silence. No exceptions. Another page, tea leaves, should never be discarded near ferns. They sulk. And another folded at the corner. A frond raised in melancholy cannot be coaxed. It must be comforted. She closes the book with care. And then something curious happens. She lights a small candle beeswax and sets it near the base of the piano. Then, with deliberate ease, she lifts the small fern in the daisy pot and places it on top of the piano's polished lid. "You'll want a good seat," she whispers. Then she sits and begins again. This time a waltz. Not loud, not formal. More like a secret written in melody. The kind of tune you hum when you don't want to be alone, but aren't ready for conversation either. The fern seems content. You sit very still, and suddenly you see it all differently. This isn't just about music or soil or sunlight. It's about rhythm, about returning, about showing up for something that grows so slowly, you forget to notice. Until one day, it unfurls just for you. She plays the final note, lets it hang in the air and exhales, then says, "This one's yours now." You glance at the daisy pot, surprised. She nods. Ferns do best when spoken to daily, but they remember kindness more. You cradle the pot in your hands. It's warm from the sunlight. One frond curls slightly, not in resistance, but in acknowledgement. You say quietly, "Hello," and though no one says a word, the moment feels returned. She writes in her diary as you leave the room, the tip of her pen soft against the page. "Played for asplenium. Gifted daisy fern to guest." She whispered back. Outside, the clouds drift on. Inside, the music continues. In root and leaf and memory. A day of gray skies. The kind that hushes everything. Footsteps. Clocks, even the occasional cough behind a door. The drawing room glows with lamplight, not sunlight. And somehow this makes the ferns seem greener, as if thriving in the quiet is what they were made for. Today, she's reading. You find her in a high-backed chair, a wool blanket across her knees, and a thick botanical magazine spread across her lap. Beside her, a teacup rests on a stack of books that have long since become furniture. She looks up as you enter. "Did you know," she says without preamble, "that women once submitted fern poems to the Illustrated London News?" You raise an eyebrow. She flips a page, taps the column gently, and reads aloud. "A frond I met in quiet glade, with curls that ask no name. I knelt beside its emerald shade, and left the woods the same." She closes the magazine with a smile. Amateurs, but devoted ones. You take the seat opposite her, where a small fern, tiny, delicate, grows inside what appears to be a repurposed sugar bowl. "It's called Biscuit," she says, noticing your glance. "Because it sprouted beside one." You don't ask further. You've learned better by now. She sets the magazine aside and reaches for her scrapbook. Not a diary, not quite. This one is a little more playful, pages filled with newspaper clippings, pressed leaves, drawings of teacups, snippets of poetry, and even a tiny crumbling theater ticket labeled simply, "He wore ferns in his lapel." You leaf through slowly. Here, a cartoon of a woman elbow deep in a fern pot. Caption: "Pteridomania claims another." There, an ad for fern-themed morning stationery. Subtle, elegant, evergreen. She pauses over a particular page, an illustration of two women back to back, each holding a frond like a fan. "Magazine debates," she explains. Some believed ferns should be admired only in the wild. Others thought domestic cultivation was a form of appreciation. It nearly became a proper feud. Historians still debate whether fern enthusiasm was sincere botanical curiosity, or simply another fashionable diversion for women denied more public roles. But the passion was real. You see it now pressed in these pages. Letters to editors, sketches mailed across counties, spores traded like friendship bracelets. She flips to a page filled with tiny advertisements. One catches your eye. Fern starter kits includes Frond's Case Whispering Guide. You grin. Another for the discerning lady botanist, imported spores from Scottish ruins. She reads a third aloud. Discreet correspondence available, no questions, just plants. You laugh together. There's something healing about it, this gentle humor, this faded ink joy. It feels like eavesdropping on a world where curiosity bloomed beneath corsets and good posture. She leans back. "I like this part of the hobby," she says. "The soft absurdity. The fact that someone somewhere once wrote a sonnet to a spore." You close the scrapbook and rest your hand on the cover. It's warm. Or maybe that's just you. "Do you have a favorite poem?" you ask. She thinks, then nods. She rises, walks to her writing desk, and returns with a slip of paper. In her own hand it reads, "When words feel too heavy to carry alone, I say them to leaves. They answer by living." You read it twice. Then again. It's not published, not famous, not clipped from a magazine. It's hers. You look up. She says nothing. Just sits the lamp, casting soft halos through her curls, the fern at her side, brushing her elbow like a sigh. You sit in silence, and the silence, you realize, is full. Not empty. Never empty. The scrapbook remains on the table, its spine slightly open, pages settling with the room's breath. Biscuit leans gently to the left, and you whisper something small to him just to see if he hears it. A soft knock sounds from somewhere, deep in the house. Not urgent, more like a courtesy, as if the door itself wanted to announce a visitor without troubling anyone too much. She looks up from her desk. "Ah," she says, rising slowly. "He's early." You follow her down the hall, your steps muffled by the worn carpet, past portraits of people who may or may not have been real. The door opens to reveal a tall man in a brown coat carrying a cloth bundle and wearing the slightly distracted expression of someone who has spent too much time in greenhouses. "This," she says, motioning to you, "is Mr. Godfrey, the village apothecary and occasional fern conspirator." He bows, then hands her the bundle. She unwraps it carefully like a precious cake or a secret, revealing a clump of root soil still clinging. A frond, newly cut, curls like a sleeping comma. "She was found behind the vestry," he says, brushing his hands. "Unusual shape to the sorry. Thought of you, of course." She nods appreciatively, then motions you both into the drawing room. The fern is laid on a dish towel with reverence, and she begins inspecting the undersides of the leaves with a small magnifying lens. They say Mr. Godfrey offers that ferns growing on church grounds pick up stories. You tilt your head. Stories. Old ones, he replies. Quiet ones. Things whispered in pews left behind in hymns clinging to brickwork. You don't ask if he's serious. At this point, you've learned all things are true, eventually. She lifts the frond to the light. The sorry tiny clusters of reproductive spores are shaped like crescent moons. Pale gold. Like coins, she murmurs. Or promises. She turns to you. Would you like to try planting her? You do. The pot is already waiting, a shallow bowl lined with moss and softened loam. You press the roots down, gently tuck the soil in close, and mist the whole thing with a spritz of rosewater. Name her, she says. You hesitate. Agnes, you say finally. She feels ancient. Agnes it is. She writes it down immediately in the margin of her diary, with the date, time, and a small drawing of a church door. You glance over and notice another note. May have absorbed secrets. Will whisper respectfully. Mr. Godfrey chuckles. You're still at it then. Of course, she says. A tradition can't maintain itself. He sits gratefully accepting the tea you hand him, and begins unpacking a small envelope. Inside are scrapings, fern roots, preserved spores, a dried sprig of mint. These, he says, are for the herbalists. But I brought extras. Some think ferns powdered help with melancholy. You glance toward the farthest fern in the room, a quiet, slumping one in a green-glazed pot. She catches your look. That's Minerva. She's been moody since March. Historians still debate the folk uses of ferns in Victorian apothecaries. Some believed powdered fern root cured worms. Others swore it prevented nightmares. Still others, the romantics perhaps thought fern spores granted invisibility, but only if gathered at midnight on Midsummer's Eve in complete silence. Mr. Godfrey stands to go, gathering his notes and his empty cup. He turns back just once. Keep an eye on Agnes. I suspect she knows things. She sees him out, then returns to you with a sigh. Godfrey's a rare breed. Knows plants better than people. Trusts both the same. You sit together as twilight filters in blue and soft and tentative. She jots another line in the diary. Agnes planted. Possibly melancholic. Possibly clairvoyant. You lean close to the fern. Whisper something kind just in case. And though she doesn't speak, not in words, Agnes seems to settle more deeply into the soil, as if listening, as if remembering. Evening comes on quiet feet. The lamps are already lit when you return to the drawing room, casting warm halos against the walls and flickering across the edges of picture frames. Outside, the trees rustle gently in the dark, their outlines wavering against the cloudy sky like thoughts just out of reach. Tonight feels heavier. Not sad, exactly. More like thoughtful weather. She's seated at her low table, arranging items into neat little rows. Not ferns this time, but letters. Stack after stack, ribboned and ink-smudged. Her fingers move slowly, as if each one must be weighed, measured, remembered. These, she says without looking up, are the ones I never answered. You sit beside her. Some envelopes are yellowed, others crisp and recent. A few bear embossed seals. A circle of ivy, a wax fern, the initials ML, in a soft, quivering hand. She opens one, inside a single line. It's been too long. I still have the frond you gave me. She folds it again and ties the ribbon tighter. There's something about fern friends, she murmurs. They never truly fade. But sometimes, we forget to water them. You nod, unsure whether she means people or plants. Likely both. She selects another letter. This one is thicker. A pressed specimen falls out. As she opens it, a silver-green frond, curled and dry, but perfectly preserved. You both lean in. Ladies' Fern Society of Devon, she reads aloud. Invitation to contribute to the next volume. Theme Secrets of the Soil. She smiles faintly. That was 15 years ago. I never replied. Still meant to. She pulls over a fresh page of stationery soft cream with faint leaf filigree and begins to write. Not as an apology, as a continuation. Dear Francis. The soil still speaks, though quieter now. Agnes has joined the circle. Queen Catherine remains firm in her opinions. I remember your theory about seasonal sulking, Minerva. Proves it true. If you still keep your diary, open it tonight. The moon is thin, and the ferns are listening. She stops, then adds, P.S. I still wear the locket. The frond inside never curled. You watch as she folds the letter and places it in a fresh envelope. No stamp, no address. Just the name. Francis. She sets it in a stack labeled, to be sent, someday. Historians still debate whether these kinds of friendships formed through letters, ferns, and silence were deep bonds or fanciful distractions. But here now, in this room full of listening plants and quiet ritual, it feels like something closer to devotion. She reaches for a box tucked under the table. Inside tokens, pressed petals wrapped in tissue, bits of bark tied with silk thread, one spoonful of dried soil sealed in glass, labels like whispers from Cornwall moonlit walk. He said he'd write. He didn't. Gift from someone I almost loved. She hands you a small envelope. Inside a pressed frond, pale and slightly translucent, folded inside a page torn from a novel. The margins are filled with notes. Not about the book, but about the fern. You read, observed during illness, refused to fade, whispered something I didn't quite catch. You look up. She simply says, "For you." You tuck the envelope carefully into your coat. The silence that follows is full like water in a deep well. Nothing missing, nothing needing to be filled. Then she rises and begins to light the smaller candles, those she saves for letter nights. The flames catch slowly, low and gold. She whispers to Queen Catherine, "Another one's gone. Please don't judge." And to Agnes, "You did well today. You're settling in." You feel the warmth spread not just from the fire but from the space itself. From the care she gives even to silence. She returns to her chair, picks up her pen, begins again. You watch her write. To you who never signed your name, the dreams still make sense. The night deepens, and the house becomes quieter still, as if it too is resting its bones. A fire murmurs in the grate. The ferns cast elongated shadows on the walls, their silhouettes swaying faintly, as if speaking to one another in leaf language. You're sitting in the corner now, thumbing through one of her older diaries, the one with a faded ribbon marker and corners softened from years of turning. She joins you, tea in hand, wrapped in a shawl that smells faintly of cedar and lavender. No earrings tonight, no tidy bun. Her hair has fallen loose, curling slightly at her temples. "You found the grief entries," she says softly, not as a question. You glance down. The pages are different here, the handwriting slightly more slanted, the ink pressed harder into the paper. And the drawings. All ferns, yes, but in states of decay. Wilted. Torn. One is sketched half-finished, with a single line underneath. I stopped when she stopped. She kneels beside you and traces a finger along the margin. After Mother passed, she says the ferns changed. Or I did. You wait. There was one, a delicate little lady I'd named Elspeth. She lived in a teacup. Kept her beside Mother's bed. After, she wouldn't uncurl. Stayed tight and hard like a fist. She looks away toward the window. Outside, a single moth dances near the glass. I tried music, poetry, even silence, but nothing. So I stopped writing. For a while, you flip the page gently. Another drawing, a fern that's almost blackened with shading. At the bottom, in tiny letters, "Didn't say goodbye. Didn't need to." She continues, "But one day, months later, I was dusting the shelf and noticed something odd. Elspeth had unfurled. Not all the way, just a touch. Enough to say I'm still here." She leans back against the chair and closes her eyes. It was the first moment I believed I would keep going too. You don't speak. You don't need to. Historians rarely write about this part, the private griefs women tended to in parlor corners, through plants and letters and the silent gestures of care. But the diaries don't lie. They're full of names crossed out, ferns marked, deceased, little prayers pressed between pages. She rises and retrieves a worn notebook from the mantel, darker in color, more weathered. "This one's for them," she says, opening to the first page. A list. Each entry bears only a name and a description. Aunt Lillian, Boston fern, curled at the tips, loved the sound of bells. Jules, mossy, liverwort, fragile, used to hum under his breath. Father Staghorn, impossible to move, lived like a cathedral. She turns the pages, and the list grows. Some entries have pressed fronds beside them, others empty space, like the plant never arrived or was never ready. You ask gently, "Do they all have ferns?" She nods. Or at least, a place for one. You realize this is not just a diary. It's a memorial. A quiet green cemetery of stories, each one still growing, even in stillness. She passes you the book. "Add someone if you like." You hesitate. Then you write, Grandmother Maidenhair, soft-voiced, used to sing to her orchids in winter. She nods, not prying, just receiving. You glance around the room. The plants rustle faintly. The pages whisper as they close. She lights a final candle smaller than the rest. "This one's for the ones who never got written down," she murmurs. The forgotten roots. The room dims a little more. The fire quiets to embers. She adds one last line to her diary tonight. Elspeth smiled today. "I think she forgave me," and as the candle flickers low, you swear the little fern in the teacup bends slightly toward her, like a nod, or a thank you. Morning arrives, slowly, not with fanfare or sunlight flooding in, but with a kind of quiet return. The house exhales. The ferns seem to wake before anyone else, fronds lifting slightly toward the gauzy light that filters through linen curtains. You find her in the kitchen this time, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned messily, hands dusted with flour. A batch of scones is rising in the oven. The kettle sings softly on the stove. "Today," she says with a grin, "we repot." You follow her to the conservatory where a table has been cleared, soil laid out, and a mismatched collection of ceramic pots waits like an audience. The air smells like damp clay and lemon balm. She hands you a trowel, a pair of linen gloves, and a knowing look. You can tell a lot about a person by how they repot. You begin with a small fern shy barely anchored. As you lift it from its cramped pot, you're surprised by the root ball. Dense, wound tight. It had been holding on for dear life. She watches you gently loosen it. Some need help letting go. You nod. You place it into its new home, a pale green pot with a tiny chip on one rim. It suits the fern somehow. Modest, honest. She moves on to a larger specimen, a flamboyant, feathered creature she calls Vivienne. Her roots are sprawling lively, already searching for more space before the new soil even touches them. Vivienne is ambitious, she says. She likes drama. Just last week, she leaned off the shelf for attention. You smile, then ask, "Do you always name them?" She shrugs. "Not always. Only the ones who ask." You glance around the room. Some pots have labels, others don't. Some simply bear initials carved faintly into their sides. One, an old wooden box near the back, reads, "Just Fern." As you work, she shares stories. That one came from a railway station, smuggled in a coat sleeve. This one grew from a spore left in a letter. No idea who sent it. That one I found her in a teacup. There was no tea. You repo quietly. The work is soothing. Soil breath placement. The ferns lean toward your hands as you press the roots into place. They are grateful, you think. Or maybe just relieved. Historians still debate whether repotting ferns was seen as domestic duty or something more sacred. But in homes like this, it's clear it's not about control. It's about care. You watch her cradle one of the older ferns, roots gnarled, tips browned. She doesn't speak to this one. Not with words. Just a touch. A pause. You recognize the silence now. It's the kind people share when something mattered once, and still does. She nestles it into fresh soil, then leans in and whispers, not with hope, but with memory. After a while, she sets her trowel aside and opens her notebook. Not her diary, not the scrapbook, but a simple ledger labeled Repottings, Truths, and Outcomes. She logs each fern by name, date, pot description, and a final column marked mood. You peek at the entries. Walter, 14 May, blue speckled pot, cautiously optimistic. Minerva, the 2nd of March, square clay, bitter but polite. Francis, the 23rd of April, glass bowl, melancholy in spring. Lifted today. You add your fern to the list. She waits for your entry under mood. You write unlearning. Gently. She nods, then adds a sketch beside it. A tiny spiral. Not perfect, but reaching. After all the ferns are settled, you both sit in the conservatory sipping tea, hands still lined with soil. The rain begins again, soft, rhythmic. The kind that feels more like music than weather. The new pots rest on their shelves like old friends come home. A few fronds already lean toward the sound of the kettle whistling faintly in the next room. She sighs, not tired, just full. Then writes in her diary, "All repotted. All at peace." One whispered back. You're not sure if she means the plant or you. The next day unfolds in soft pale layers, the kind of day where even time seems reluctant to move forward. Outside dew still clings to the garden path well past noon. The clouds hang low, not stormy, just thoughtful. She's in the study today, not with her plants but with books. Real ones this time. Heavy volumes bound in cracked leather titles, stamped in gold domestic fern cultivation. The illustrated fern atlas whispers of the green world. You enter quietly. She doesn't look up right away. Did you know? She says after a moment that some Victorians believed ferns could detect lies. You blink. She taps a passage in the book before her. They called it frond behavior, said if a fern drooped while someone spoke it was a sign of falsehood. You move closer. Ferns, being naturally attuned to emotional balance, may respond unfavorably to deception, particularly in confined spaces. The Gentlewoman's Guide to Parlor Botany, 1871. You raise an eyebrow. She grins. It's absurd. But I've watched Walter wilt during certain conversations. You don't doubt her. She flips the page to a chapter titled, The Sentiments of Spores. It reads more like poetry than science. There are diagrams of fronds labeled with emotions: sorrow, joy, doubt. Beside each is a small drawing of a woman, hands cupped around a pot, her expression mirroring the plant. She turns another page. This one bears an inked stamp in the corner: Fern Society of Ealing, private archive copy. The notes are handwritten in the margins, thoughts from a previous reader, perhaps a woman much like her. Mother's fern curled completely when father arrived. I whispered the truth. It uncrossed its frond. She closes the book slowly. I think it's all metaphor, she says. But then again, aren't most things? You nod. There's something else on the table. A folded letter with pressed edges unopened. She hesitates before touching it. It's from Margaret, she says quietly. We haven't written in years. You say nothing. She was someone I once collected with. We used to meet in Devon near the coastal cliffs. Spore exchanges. Sketchbooks. Sometimes silence. You hear the pause she doesn't explain. She opens the letter with care. Inside a single page. Handwritten. I found a frond yesterday that looked like the one we lost. The one by the path near the chapel. I pressed it for you. It's enclosed. If you still keep a place for forgotten things, let her rest there. And wrapped inside a thin lacy fern, pale, nearly transparent. You both hold your breath. She reaches for a small book, one you haven't seen before, bound in green silk, edges frayed. Inside each page bears a name you don't recognize. This is the Book of Almosts, she whispers. Friendships. Conversations. Things that never quite bloomed. She places the fern inside. Gently. No glue. Just trust. Then she writes beside it. Margaret's frond returned. She remembered. I did too. Historians still debate whether fern collecting was ever a form of coded intimacy, a quiet language for women to say what couldn't be said aloud. But leaf by leaf, diary by diary, the evidence whispers yes. She returns the book to its place on the shelf, nestled between ferns and friendship and letters never sent. Outside, the fog begins to lift. A small breeze drifts through the open window, rustling the leaves of the nearest plant. It waves, perhaps, or listens. She sighs and sits beside you, pouring tea without speaking. The silence is not empty. It's shared. You both sip. She writes one more line in the back of the green silk book. We almost lost her. But almost isn't. Never. It's the kind of evening that feels suspended. Neither late nor early. Neither bright nor dim. The sky is lavender blue, and the house seems to reflect that in tone, soft, hushed, settled. Tonight she's in the hallway. You find her seated cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by shallow wooden drawers, the archival kind built for museums or well-organized eccentrics. Each drawer is labeled in her script: North Wall, Sea Found, Unnamed Finds, Companions. She smiles as you approach. Time to visit the archive. She slides open the first drawer. Inside, hundreds of fern specimens, each pressed and mounted on thick paper labeled with date, place, sometimes even time of day. Some are pale and faded, others still vibrant. Some have little notes in the margins found in fog. Grew through fence, determined. Didn't ask permission, still took root. You sit beside her and peer into another drawer, companions. These ones are different. The ferns are arranged in pairs side by side, sometimes even curling toward each other. A few are tied together with thin ribbon. One pair is mounted beneath a pressed note, found together, left together, pressed together. She watches your expression, then speaks softly. Not all of them were grown for science. Some were kept for comfort. She pulls out a particularly delicate page 2 ferns curved in a mirrored arc, forming something like a circle. They were growing out of the same patch of soil, she says. Different species. Unusual. You look closer. They do seem connected, not fused, but familiar. You whisper almost without thinking, they look like they're holding hands. She smiles. Historians still debate whether these companion pressings were symbolic or merely aesthetic. Some see sentimentality. Others see coded affection, traces of intimacy pressed flat and passed between drawers hidden in plain sight. She slides out another drawer, this one labeled Echoes. These are her favorites, she says. Not the most beautiful, not rare, but memorable. Each one has a story scribbled faintly beside it in poems, in questions, in moments of uncertainty. Is this joy or memory? I heard music when I picked this one. It grew where nothing else did. You reach for one marked only with a circle and a small X. She leans closer. That one grew in a place I didn't expect to return to, and yet I did. You nod. You don't need more explanation. She lifts one final drawer. This one has no label. Inside only blank paper. Dozens of sheets, all empty, waiting. You glance at her. For the ones I haven't met yet, she says. You're quiet for a long moment. The fire crackles softly in the drawing room nearby. A draft stirs the curtain by the hall window. Then she turns to you and says, "Would you like to add one?" You pose, then reach into your coat pocket, the envelope she gave you days ago still there. You pull out the delicate pressed frond. Its shape is simple, but something about it feels familiar now. You choose a sheet. Write your name. And below it, whispered to me when I needed a reason to stay. You place the frond carefully. She adds it to the drawer, slides it closed, not locked, just at rest. Then she rises, dusts her hands, and says softly, "They don't need to be remembered by everyone. Just one person is enough." You glance back at the drawers. So many stories, so many silences pressed into form, and as you walk beside her toward the lamplit parlor, you realize ferns don't shout. They survive. They listen. They keep growing, even when no one is watching. Night has fully fallen now, not the kind of night that creeps in unnoticed, but a thick, velvet quiet that wraps around the house like a shawl. Outside, the garden rests in silhouette branches, blurred dew forming slowly on leaf edges. The moon, not yet full, casts a faint glow across the conservatory glass. You find her in the drawing room, not writing, not watering, not even humming, just sitting. A small oil lamp burns on the table beside her, its light catching the edges of her face and the fronds of Queen Catherine, who sits as always in her corner, regal and composed. You join her. She offers you a blanket, not out of necessity, but out of habit. A ritual of comfort, of presence. It's a good night for stillness, she says. They like stillness. She gestures toward the ferns. Dozens of them. Around the fireplace. On shelves. Hanging above. All of them motionless, and yet undeniably alive. The room feels like a chapel. Tonight, she doesn't open a book or a diary. Instead, she reaches beneath the side table and brings out a small wooden box, round, polished, smooth with age edges worn by thumb and time. Inside, a single item, a locket, oval, gold-toned and slightly tarnished. She opens it slowly. Inside, not a photo, not a portrait, a fern, tiny, pressed, curled into the shape of a comma. She doesn't speak. You don't either. She holds it in the light and then sets it between you. For a moment, it's not a plant. It's a heartbeat, a conversation that never needed words. After a long pause, she says, "This was the first." You glance at her. The first one I pressed. The first I named. The first I whispered to. And who whispered back? You nod. Somewhere in the hallway, a floorboard sighs. The house breathes. She takes the locket and presses it gently into your palm. Not a gift, not a farewell, just a gesture. Then she whispers, "Keep it for the quietest days." You tuck it away. She rises slowly and walks to the hearth. With practiced fingers, she dims the oil lamp one by one, until only the faintest light flickers from the embers. You remain seated, surrounded by the green hush. The air smells faintly of rosewater and soil. She turns one last time and whispers not to you, not to the room, but to the ferns. "Good night, loves." Queen Catherine bows ever so slightly. Minerva does not respond. Biscuit leans contentedly left. You close your eyes and listen to the kind of silence that contains everything.